Thanks a lot, Matt. Good evening, everybody. Last time I worked, pints were £4.20 where I work, but by the time we open again, they'll probably be £8. I don't know. Our guest this evening is Sonny Peart. Sonny is a university lecturer. He is an amateur theatre director. Slightly more relevant for our purposes this evening. He's also an ultra runner and one of the founders of Black Trail Runners, an organization that started last year to try and do something about the lack of diversity in trail and ultra running. And mostly this evening, we're going to talk about that. How are you doing, Sonny?
I'm good, thank you. It's a long time since I've been to a pub, so I have no idea how much a pint of beer costs these days. I'm pretty sure it was already more than £5 down here, but I could be wrong.
Well, because we get people in from all over the place. We always get people who are absolutely delighted that beer is only £4.20 because they live in London and it's £1,000. But then some people who are incensed that it is £4. I feel like that means we're sitting in the middle and doing all right. Anyway, before we get on to Black Trail Runners, a bit about you. How did you get into running, and from there, how did you get into trail running and ultra running?
Yeah, so I'm a relatively recent convert to running. Really only started running regularly in my 40s. I mean, I was sporty as a child at school. I played football, rugby, cricket, athletics. I ran the 100 meters when I was at school. I played football at university, but long distance running wasn't my thing. We only ever did long distance running when the weather was really bad and the pitches at school were too frozen to play rugby or football. My school was on the edge of Epping Forest, and those were the days that we did cross country running, and it was horrible. So I did run London Marathon in 2003 because I just happened to be in a job where it was possible to do that, and I got offered a place basically. But I didn't start running regularly until 2012. Like many people, I was a bit out of shape, put on a bit of weight, began to realize that I wasn't very happy with that. So started just running in my gym at work, and then took a trip to my local running club, Monday night run, November, raining, dark, miserable. Turned up thinking that no one would be there, because why would anyone want to be out in that kind of weather? And of course, lots of people did turn up, and I managed to run the 5 miles with them and never looked back. So, you know, once a week became twice a week, became 3 times a week, became, you know, your whole life. So I was doing lots and lots of running, and then gradually building up the sort of race distances. The club would do road races, 5K, 10K, whatever. And I've always kind of thought that you can consider running distances as just kind of doubling things. So if you can do a 5K, then you can probably do a 10. If you can do 10, then you can probably do a half. If you can do a half, then you can probably do a full marathon. And so in that way, I kind of ended up building up distances. And then my mother got seriously ill, and with a terminal disease, quite a rare one. And as part of kind of dealing with that, I decided to run a marathon and raise money for the charity that dealt with her condition. So she had a condition called amyloidosis, and there's one charity in the country that deals with that called Myeloma UK. They're based in Edinburgh, and so they had places in the Edinburgh Marathon. So I entered that and ran and raised a few £1,000s for that. And yeah, so that was kind of my way back into marathon running. And I was quite pleased with how I did. I trained okay for it because now I was part of a running club, and there was good support around. I ran 3:51, and I thought, but I could go faster than that, I think. So then I just carried on running some other marathons, did Manchester, Brighton, London again. but then I had a friend at my running club she was an ultra runner. She did a number of ultras in Scotland, and one month, well, it was in 2015, she was entered into a race in Sussex called the Weald Challenge, which is a very rural race, and there was a half, a marathon, and an ultra version of it. And she was doing the marathon, and she just kind of put a note out to club members saying, does anyone fancy doing this with me? And I thought, yeah, I'll do this. I've got some other races coming up. This would be a nice thing to do. And it was just a revelation, because I'd only ever run road marathons, and this was 90% on trails. I think there was about 50 stiles to climb over on this race. At the end of it, you would happily never have seen another stile again. But there was rivers, woodland. There was one point where there was an unmanned railway crossing in a kind of valley. I mean, it was just everything. And I thought, this is much better than running on roads. It's much more fun. So that kind of got me hooked, really. And from that, I ran my first ultra later that year. I think I literally kind of came home from that race and was online, as you do, sort of searching around for stuff to enter and what looks good. And I saw some marketing for the Race to the Stones, which in those days was still relatively new. I think it'd be going for a few years. But they had really great marketing. There was a lovely video of people running through fields and great music in the background. I thought, yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a sucker for marketing, basically. So I just thought, that looks fantastic. I'm going to enter that. So I did. And then another of my club mates, he entered it as well. So we didn't run together, but we kind of started together and we met halfway. I did the 2-day version of it. And then we saw each other at the end. And again, it was just fantastic. And for me, the difference between doing that, where you get to traverse the country, was just a totally different experience to running, a city road race of any kind. It really felt as though you were traveling across the landscape, and I'm quite
Race
interested.
to the Stones a point-to-the-point course?
Yeah. So Race to the Stones goes from Oxfordshire to Avebury along the Ridgeway, which is an ancient sort of trackway, and it is sort of high up. There's lots of it. Well, there's not a lot of elevation, but it's above the sort of surrounding valleys, because in kind of medieval times, you didn't have proper roads. So in winter, if you were in the valleys, everything would be flooded and muddy and horrible. So the only way to have a kind of passable route was for it to be up on the tops. So quite a few of our sort of trails, that's where they are. So, I love this idea that you're running on a trail which has been a kind of a route for hundreds, thousands of years. And you're really seeing the country in a way that you just don't normally. We spend so much time, well, in pre-COVID times, we spend so much time in our cars that we don't really see that landscape around us. And running ultras is, to my mind, pretty much the best way of doing that, because it's kind of like a fast day out in the country. You can see lots of stuff in a relatively small amount of time. It can be painful, but I think the compensation is just fantastic, because you see stuff that other people don't get to see, or you don't see yourself, in your regular life. So yeah, since then I've never really looked back. I'm just kind of looking for maybe not just longer ultras, but just ultras in places that I haven't seen before. So looking to experience new parts of the country.
This has been a theme the last 2 weeks when we had Jo Meek on. She never does the same race twice, because she always wants to go to new places. She picks a random country in the world each year. It's like, I'm going to go and race in Kyrgyzstan or wherever. And it's a brilliant vehicle for exploration.
Yeah, I mean, things I've never actually raced abroad. I've run abroad when I've been on holiday, but I've never been in a race abroad, not yet. But there's actually a lot of space in our country and a lot of places to go. And, I feel like I'm fairly well traveled within the UK, but there's still places I haven't been to and, would really love to go and experience.
Fantastic. Black trail runners. How did that come about? You've been in the sport for a while. You've been running for 9 years, discounting your dalliance with the London Marathon. How did Black Trail Runners come into existence last year?
So most people watching this, I'm sure, will know that last year George Floyd, a man in America, was killed by a police officer in a very kind of public and horrific way, and that sparked a debate. A public debate and a kind of resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, which had been around for a while, but had kind of been in abeyance, if you like. So lots of people were talking about race and criminal justice and equality and diversity. And it was during lockdown, so we weren't doing very much. And I got a call or an email from James Elson, who is the race director at Centurion Running, who do 50 and 100-mile races. And I'd run a few of his races before. I knew James fairly well. And he asked me if I would be willing to come onto his podcast to talk about diversity in ultra running and Black Lives Matter, or in fact, the lack of diversity in ultra running. And I'll be honest, it wasn't something that I'd actually really thought about before. But James had noticed that of all the thousands of runners that he'd had run his races, he could count the Black runners on one hand. I always thought James was really great at remembering names, because when you meet him, months later you'll see him and he'll know what your name is. And I was always impressed by that, because I don't have a great memory for that kind of thing. And but then he told me that, well, the reason I remembered your name, Sonny, is because there's only literally 5 Black people who've ever run my races, so you're one of them, so I remembered your name. So when he told me that, firstly I said, yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But it actually got me thinking about it. And when I did think about it, I realized he was right. Most of the time when I turned up to any kind of trail event or ultra event, I would be the only person of color there. Now, I hadn't really noticed it, because that's pretty much how my entire life has been. I grew up in 1970s Yorkshire, the only Black kid in my school. Moved to Essex and went to grammar school, the only Black kid in the school. Went to university, only Black adult in my college. And then, often in work situations, be the only Black person there. So it wasn't, it was just something I was used to. But in preparation for talking to him on this podcast, I did a bit of research particularly into how Black people were represented in the sport of trail running and ultra running. And so I just looked at a number of websites for the companies that I had run races with, and looked at half a dozen of them, looked at hundreds of images, and just couldn't see any of Black people. I mean, they're just all white. And then it kind of sort of was brought home to me that, yeah, this is odd. There's something going on here which doesn't quite compute. So, and in fact, the only image of a Black person that I found on one of these websites was a picture of Sidney Poitier. Older viewers will remember him as a Black film star from the kind of middle of the 20th century. And there's a race which some people will have heard of called Escape from Meriden, which is run by Beyond Marathon, which is a company that I've run races with. I've run their Convergence, and it has a bit of a kind of prisoner escape feel vibe going on. So you can enter it dressed in orange and chained to another runner if you want to. And as part of the imagery around that, there was a picture from a film called The Defiant Ones, which stars Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. And it was a picture of Sidney Poitier chained to Tony Curtis. So I've spent hours looking at ultra running websites, and the only image of a black person I find is one who's an escaped convict. This doesn't sit well. This,
Not good. Oh,
yeah, I mean, so, and it's not that, this is a deliberate, conscious, effort to try and misrepresent people, but it's just people don't think about it. And the sport as it is at the moment is not very diverse at all, despite what many people will think about it and maybe say about it. So I had that conversation with James. It went out on the podcast, and the response was quite dramatic. Had a lot of people respond, and they kind of fell into 2 or 3 categories. So there were black runners who said, really glad you're having this conversation. Someone needs to talk about this because this is our experience as well. We don't see other people like us when we're out there on the trails or when we're entering events. Then there were white people saying, I've never thought of that before. You've literally opened my eyes to something I've never considered. And then there were a few who were, what's the problem? The trails are open to everyone. You just need a pair of shoes and you can go out and run. So, but amongst those were some other people who said, we should do something about this. So there was Phil Young, who'd been working in the kind of outdoor industry for quite some time. Sabrina Pace Humphreys, who's another ultra runner who had been involved in campaigning, anti-racism campaigning in the Cotswolds. And they contacted me. And as a result of our discussions, we kind of thought, well, let's do something about it then. Let's set up an organization and try and change this. And that's where it came from. And so we contacted a few other people that we knew who we thought might be interested. And we ended up with 8 of us in our first meeting, deciding what are we going to do? How are we going to approach this? So we set it up as a community, but also a campaigning group, because we wanted something which people could feel welcome to join, because we want to encourage more Black people to get out on the trails. But we also recognize that there are quite a few of those communities around already of one kind or another. But what was missing was some organization which would actively campaign to change things, to change the running culture that we have in this country. So we had an overtly campaigning aim right from the start. So the very first thing we did when we launched was to write to about 40 race organizers, trail organizers in the UK, and ask them to collect ethnicity data from their entrants. Because we believe that if you don't count something, you don't really know what the issue is. We had our own anecdotal personal experience, but we didn't have any data. No one had any data because no one was collecting it. So we asked for that, and some of those race directors responded very positively immediately. Centurion, James were the first and said, yeah, we'll do that straight away. And they did that. And others have followed. And so we've been collecting data now. And the picture that has emerged not just confirms what we thought, but actually suggests that we kind of underestimated the problem, really.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we've got data on more than 10,000 race entries for this year. So for trail races in 2021. And well, if I backtrack a little bit, if we think about the UK population, the Office for National Statistics collects data in the census every 10 years. We've got one that's just kind of going on right now. So the data from the most recent one in 2011 shows that 3% of the population are what the ONS calls black. They have 18 different ethnic categories. 2 of those count as black, so either African or Caribbean. And then they also have categories for mixed race, white, and African and Caribbean. So for them, black is 3% of the population, mixed race is 1.5%, so 4.5% altogether. So in a race with 400 or 500 people, you would expect, if black people were actually equally represented, for there to be 20 black runners, maybe. We've not seen a race with more than 6, and we see quite a lot that just have none. The first race that we got data back from, the only 2 black runners in it were me and another of the co-founders. So for the data that we've got for this year, so more than 10,000 race entries, the percentage of black and mixed race entries is 0.6%.
Wow.
So there's 3.9% missing, if you like.
0.6%.
Yeah.
So
out of 10,000 people, you've got 60 who are black.
Wow.
And that's black and mixed. I mean, I don't count as black as far as the ONS is concerned, but as far as we're concerned, I identify as black, and so that's fine. But so yeah, I mean, if you take it the other way around and say what's the white British population in the UK, it's around 82, 83%, something like that. In the data that we've got, it's 95. So this is an overwhelmingly white sport, frankly.
Yeah.
So when people say the trails are open for everybody, I ask them to try and explain that data in a way that doesn't say black people don't like running, because clearly that is nonsense.
Yeah. The only way to explain that is that black people are disproportionately disinterested in running on trails,
which makes no sense.
Yeah.
So then the question is, well, what is the issue? And that's where we start getting into the difficult part of the conversation, because it becomes about explaining systemic racism.
Yeah.
And people hate to hear the term racism, and I hate to hear it, frankly, but lots of people misunderstand it. We're not talking here about race directors or runners abusing people of color, or deliberately excluding them, or anything like that. What we're talking about is the structure of our society based on historical facts and how the country has developed over time, which disproportionately affect black people, and in a way that makes trail running less accessible for them. So some of that is geography. The vast majority of black people in the UK live in cities. Mm-hmm. And that's partly because when they or their ancestors arrived in the UK, many of them in the middle of the 20th century, after the Second World War, invited by the British government to come and bolster the workforce, which had been decimated by World War II. They were denied access to decent housing, they were denied access to formal finance, which meant that they ended up congregating in low quality housing in cities. So they are predominantly an urban population, even though most of them will have come from non-urban environments in their original countries. Now, remember that these were British citizens. They were part of the empire, part of the Commonwealth. They came here as British citizens. But many of them have been sent back home. When we look at the Windrush scandal, that gives us an idea of what British citizen really meant. So there's that geography element to it, and then there's a socioeconomic thing. So running is not a cheap sport. We pretend that it is. We say that it is. Yeah, you just need a pair of trainers and a pair of shorts and away you go.
Yeah.
That's not really true. I mean, a decent pair of trainers costs upwards of 100 quid, 150 pounds. And when we're talking about trail running and ultra running and things like that, it's even more so. You can't enter an ultra race without mandatory kit, a decent waterproof jacket, pack, proper trail shoes, all those kinds of things. You're talking hundreds of pounds. Most runners these days wouldn't, well, many runners these days would be embarrassed to walk out the door without a Garmin on their wrist. I know other watch brands are available, but you know, again, you're talking hundreds of pounds. So when you look at the start line of an ultra race, you're seeing, you know, every runner is got £1,000 plus of stuff on them at that point. This is not, you know, a cheap sport for many people. For a lot of people, that's just totally out of their reach. Now, of course, that's just about money. How does that relate to Black people? Well, for a number of reasons, Black people are on average poorer than white people in our country. You know, that is just an undeniable fact. They're much more likely to be working in lower paid jobs. And the reason for that, or the reasons for that, are to do with systemic racism. There have been countless studies to show that if you apply for a job in the UK and your CV has a name on it that sounds ethnic, you are much less likely to get asked for interview than if your name sounds English. You know, that's been repeated more than once. Similarly, Black person is less likely to succeed at the interview. They're less likely to get promoted. They are more likely to be paid less than their white counterparts in the same job. Now, these are patterns that we see across other groups of people. The same is true of women. So, you know, this isn't only about Black people, but being Black is one way in which you will be disadvantaged in our society currently. So, you know, I'm fortunate. I have actually lots of privileges. That's one of the reasons why this wasn't something that had really troubled me until last year. You know, I'm male, I'm pretty much middle class, I've got a university education, I've got a white collar job, I own my own house, I'm heterosexual, I'm married, I've got a British passport. I don't have to worry about any of those things. I'm not subject to open abuse when I go out in the street because I don't live in that kind of place. And, you know, I'm surrounded at work by people who are, you know, nice liberal people who wouldn't dream of, you know, uttering a racist epithet. But not everyone's in my position, and lots of people aren't. Black people are less likely to own cars, which means they can't get to the trails and things. They're more likely to be victims of crime. All of these things mean that they are at a disadvantage. And I know that this can sound like a kind of special pleading, and that people, many people, will think, oh, you're just overstating the case. You know, some of this is imagined. And what I would say to that kind of response is that it almost always comes from a position of privilege. And I know that because I've got many of those privileges myself. And there is plenty of data out there to show that the idea that we've become a sort of utopian post-racial society is just absurd. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, King's College, well, effectively a colleague of mine at King's College, I don't know him, but another academic there, produced some research on people's responses to the pandemic and how the pandemic had affected people's employment opportunities. So basically, we know lots of people have lost their jobs during the last year. but that has disproportionately affected Black people, just as it has disproportionately affected women and disproportionately affected people on low incomes. So one of the questions in this research was, why do people think that Black people have been more affected by this than white people? 1 in 7 respondents said that it was because Black people lacked motivation. So these are the people, these people walk amongst us, right?
Yeah.
An additional 4% of respondents said it's because Black people lacked the same intellectual capacity as white people. So this is 2021, and 1 in 25 people in the UK apparently believes that Black people are more stupid than white people.
That's painful.
So when we, if we want to kid ourselves that, you know, the society that we live in is entirely inclusive and diverse, then this kind of data, you know, makes a mockery of that. And again, people might ask, well, what's that got to do with trail running? You know, trail runners are lovely. You know, let's get out there on the mountains. What makes us think that trail runners are a kind of separate community to the rest of the country? We're subject to the same prejudices. I'm subject to them. Now, again, there's plenty of research which will show that across the world, when confronted with white people and Black people, people perceive Black people less positively than white people. And that's true for Black people as well. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that the representation of Black people across the media, in employment, the kinds of jobs they do, the places they live, how we see them in adverts, films, and things like that, all add to this idea that, you know, they're not the same, they're lesser than. And this goes back to the very essence of what race is about. Many people will misconceive race as being an actual biological distinction, that Black people are actually different to white people. This is not true. No biologist would agree with that. No geneticist would agree with that. There is no biological basis for race as we understand it at all, none. Race is a social construct, and it's a construct designed during the era of empire in Europe to justify the way that different people were treated by European colonizers. And what we see today is simply the hangover from that hundreds of years later. When people see people of color and they think they are lesser than them, they're simply repeating what has been constructed for them in the 18th and 19th centuries, when it was perfectly acceptable to get in a ship, go and invade a country and claim it for your own and take all their resources, and then justify it by saying they're actually not human in the way that we're human. And that persisted well into the 20th century. Yes, Britain abolished slavery in the 19th century, but the discrimination didn't go away. When people like my father arrived in the UK in the 1960s, there were the signs, you know, we've all seen them. There were the signs in the windows, no Blacks, no Irish, no dogs. You know, there were certain jobs that you just wouldn't ever be able to do, certain places you wouldn't ever be able to live. And the disadvantages associated with those, apart from the lingering discrimination described in those statistics about, you know, what people think about Black people today, you know, that lingers over generations. You know, in America, it's much more explicit. You know, you literally, banks were told not to lend money to Black people to buy houses in particular areas. Actually, amazingly, some of those laws still exist in America. There are literally houses with covenants on them which say that no person of color is allowed to buy this house. Now, those covenants aren't acted on these days, but they're still there. This is how persistent this really is. So we live in a world today where there are these kind of hangovers from this past. There's still a kind of residual sense amongst some people that white people are better than black people, and they're treated differently. And some of so for some people that's conscious. For many others, it's unconscious. And how do we know that that's having an effect? Well, we go back to those statistics. If everything was equal, if trail running, ultra running, was as inclusive as some people still believe it is, then where are those other hundreds of people who should be in those races? Why aren't they in there?
Now, the thing is, you guys have come up with 3 areas that you think are barriers to black participation in the sport: the access, skills, representation. What steps are you guys taking? What steps can other people take to break down those barriers?
Fantastic. So thank you for stopping me just carrying on ranting away there. So yeah, so access, as I said, there's geography involved in that, but there's also financial access as well. So what we can do is think about where we put races. Let's put them in places where people can get to from the city, that you don't have to have a car to get there. Let's think about maybe shorter races so that people who aren't as accustomed to running on the trails, don't feel as confident, can take part. We need to think about the cost as well. So as Black Trail Runners, we when we put on events, we will be prepared to fund people to get there. And we're not going to exclude people on a financial basis. And we've seen some organizations do that. So Centurion, with its, all the virtual races that it's run over the last 12 months, they have what they call community entries. So if you can't afford to pay, you can get a no questions asked free place. So, that takes away that barrier to some people. Then when we come to skills, well, that's about learning what it is to be in the country. If you've lived in the city and never been in the countryside, you've never been on the trails, it's quite intimidating. And frankly, you shouldn't be up a mountain if you haven't got the skills to survive there and be self-sufficient. But how do you get those? So again, we've been putting on sort of navigation courses, trail tester sort of days. Obviously, they've been limited because of the lockdown and the pandemic, but as we open up, we're going to have many more of those around the country, just to give people an experience of what it is to be on the trail and to feel comfortable and to get used to it. And then we've got representation, and this goes back to what I was talking about, seeing what trail running looks like, how it's represented. So we're working with a number of brands to change that so that how trail running is represented is how we want it to be, not how it has been. So we were talking with a brand last week who are, this is going to come out in a couple of weeks' time, they're going to pledge that their social media over the next year will go from being where 10 out of thousands of images are of people of color to where 1 in 4 is of people of color. They're going to over-represent people of color to actually say, look, this is changing. This is actually an event for you. So we lose the days where I can pick up a trail magazine, and I've got plenty of them in my study upstairs, where I can open it and there's not a single person of color in a picture of any kind. And that might seem trivial to some people, but there's a phrase that we often hear, which is that, you can't be what you can't see. We need role models. We need someone to make us feel that we can do it as well. Yeah, of course, some people have lots of confidence themselves. They can do it on their own. They're self-sufficient. But frankly, most people aren't like that. they need someone to kind of take them along. How many times have we heard someone on TV, a great sports person, say, well, yeah, there was that one thing, I saw this person and I thought, if they can do it, I can do it.
But you said yourself at the start that you went to your first ultra because someone else took you along.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in those days, apart from her, I didn't even know what an ultra was. It wasn't even a thing, right? So how would I have known to enter it? And I'm not going to walk out of my front door and just, run on trail. I mean, I live in North London, so I'd have to look pretty hard. But yeah, so, representation is really important. And it's something that you need to consciously think about, because the other issue, of course, is that it's not just about representation in media and things like that. It's about representation in decision making. And a lot of the problem that we've got is that trail running organizations are overwhelmingly white. So the people making the decisions don't have that diverse perspective. Yeah. And it's not that they're sort of deliberately saying, oh, well, we want our races to be white. It's just, it doesn't occur to them at all. We had a meeting some while ago with another ultra company who does races, big races overseas. And they do a race called the Four Rangers. So it's in Africa, and it's an ultra, and it raises money. All of the money goes to charity and to pay the wages of rangers in safari parks or wildlife reserves. Totally admirable. A lovely idea. Brilliant event.
Yeah.
When they showed us the image, their videos that they were so proud of this event, it was basically 40 white blokes running through the savannah, with a few black park rangers sort of stood watching them. And it just looked like, some throwback to colonialism. It was like the white man's burden or something.
It's like the reverse of your Escape from Meriden thing.
Yeah. I mean, it was a bit like that. And it just felt, would I myself as a black person have wanted to be one of the 40 white people, right? No, I would not. It just wouldn't have attracted me at all. It didn't say this is for you. It said this event is to raise money for people like you, which is a very different message. And again, that comes from a place of good intention, but just kind of poor execution or poor optics. And that's another kind of response that we have to deal with, in that people will say, oh, well, we didn't mean it to be like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's not about intention. If it's felt in a particular way and it discourages people or it offends people, then you should change it if your intentions are really good.
Are you encouraged by some of the progress you have seen on this so far? Like the who was it who was going to have 1/4 black representation in there?
Yeah. So
I've got a friend who's got a news website, and they had been making concerted efforts to have a gender balance in the authors on their site and the photos on the front page. And around this time last year, they said, oh shit, we haven't even thought about race, hasn't occurred to us. And so in some ways, when that's your starting point, you can make some
things can only get better, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we are encouraged. We have to be optimistic, but there's no question that lots of people, lots of individuals, lots of brands, lots of organizations are thinking about things which they weren't thinking about a year ago. Many are still struggling to really figure out what to do, and that's fine. We don't expect everyone to know we don't really know what to do, frankly. But what we want is people to try and do things, to try and change things. And we're seeing some of that. Now, it's still an open question as to how sustainable, how persistent that will be. We're seeing, as you say, lots of campaigns which are looking much more diverse than they were before. Will that still be happening in a year's time, in 3 years' time, or will people have moved on to some other agenda? We hope not, and we're going to work to make sure that that doesn't happen. And certainly what we're hearing from brands and big sports brands is encouraging. It suggests that they really do get it, because ultimately they're going to benefit from this. If we're effectively saying, look, there's like 3 or 4% of the population who should be doing this sport and they're not. So if we can get them into it, well, guess what? That's a load more trainers, a load more packs, a load more jackets that you can sell. And we're not naive. We know that that's what they want to do. So yeah, they can do that by doing the right thing, and that's not a problem.
I think it's even going beyond financially. It's good for the culture of the sport. Like, as we've alluded to, it's not just overwhelmingly white, it's male dominated, it's almost entirely middle class. Like, having that many white 40-something accountants on a start line can get a bit wearing. It might be nice to have people from different walks of life sitting in the pub after a race.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And that's part of where the challenge is that it requires a leap of imagination for people to imagine the sport differently to how it is. And I get it. I've said in my sort of show notes, I'm a proud Yorkshireman. I come from Leeds. I love cricket, and I'm a real traditionalist when it comes to cricket. I love a test match. To me, T20 is just nonsense. I can't get my head around that at all. So I understand how change can feel. Your knee-jerk reaction to it can be, no, that's worse than what we've got. Things should be as they are. Trail running and fell running and mountain running is kind of analogous to that. This is how it's always been. Let's keep it like this. But it could be different. It could be totally different. I don't know what it could look like, but I tell you what, if you actually do get sort of 4 or 5% of the entrants being Black people, it will become different. And I've no reason to believe that it won't be different in a better way. We're quite happy to appropriate Black culture in lots of areas of our life. So why not in running? Why not in trail running? We see, at the sharp end of marathon running and road running, it's dominated by East Africans. But as soon as you get back behind the sharp end, it's not at all. It really isn't.
Guys in the pantomime horse are white.
Yeah. I think it could be very different, but it could be fun. It could be really nice. And there's no reason why the things can't exist together anyway. What we can't have, is, in my view and in the view of my sort of co-founders, is just things carrying on as they are, where it simply continues to be, as you say, a white middle class, mostly male sport. If it does continue to do that, it will just die, frankly. And we love it. We actually think it's a great sport. It's great for your body. It's great for your mind. We want more people to experience it. And so we're just working to get more people involved.
Tell us what your plans are for this year with Black Trail Runners. You've got some events planned. You've got some brands involved.
Yeah, so as soon as things open up a bit more, we're going to have more in-person events, sort of trail taster days around the country. We're working with Adidas to do some coaching, because again, it's about the sort of governance and about the whole structure of the sport. So they're paying for people to train as coaches so that we can train other runners and bring people on. We're working with individual trainers as well. And we're working with some event organizers, some of the bigger event organizers in the country, on our 21 in 21 campaign, which is to get 21 Black people in a race in 2021.
I'll be really impressed if you do that.
Sorry?
I'll be really impressed if you get 21 Black people in a race in 19.
We're definitely going to. And but it will be a first. As I say, we've no reason to believe that has happened before, and it will be a real experience for some people. So yeah, working with brands to get more Black ambassadors, so that they can build representation, all of those things, and eventually, maybe not this year, we'll have our own event, organize our own race, where we're just in the process of setting up as a running club. So we'll be in a position to do that fairly soon. Yeah, so lots to do.
The hope is that these things sort of feed into each other, right? And you get these like feedback loops, I suppose, right? Where you've got more Black coaches, which gets more Black people into the sport, which more of them go on to become coaches, race directors, so on and so forth.
Yeah, which is of course how these things have happened in other areas of sport where people see Black domination. So we think of, Caribbean sprinters, we think of East African distance runners. This isn't some sort of natural genetic thing going on here. This is that over a period of time, expertise was developed, you had role models, money was invested, people saw it as a thing that they could do, and over time, it just becomes this kind of center of excellence, if you like. Late last year, I was reading about an athlete, I think the first Black athlete to get a medal at an Olympics for Britain back in the early 20th century. And he was a student at King's College. He came from Guyana, and he was a sort of middle distance runner, and that was considered to be totally unusual and kind of went against all stereotypes, because then the stereotype was that only white people could run distances, because somehow they were, had the discipline to do it or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
And we've gone from that, in 60 years to, actually, Black people are genetically predisposed to be distance runners. The fact is that these are all just social constructs every time. It's got nothing to do with genetics. You just can't deal with it like that. So you'll always see these clusters. And so, yeah, one of our aims is to try and, develop that so that, as you say, you get these kind of positive feedback loops. People see the person that looks like them, who's enjoying the sport, gets good at the sport, they go and do it as well. And then they turn into a coach, they bring other people along, etc., etc.
We have a few questions from the chat, but before we get to those, if people want to find out more, get involved, follow you guys, where are the places to go on like social media?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram as Black Trail Runners. We've got thousands of followers there, post regularly. We've got Twitter, Runners Black. We've got a Strava group, Black Trail Runners, and we've got a private Facebook group. Just search Black Trail Runners on Facebook. It's only private so that we can moderate what goes on in there, but it's effectively a space for anybody. So, we are inclusive ourselves. So whether you're Black, whether you're brown, whether you are a white ally, everyone's welcome. If your aim and objective is to increase the number of Black people running our trails, come on in.
You guys also have a podcast.
We do. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, the Checkpoint. So yeah, we've been, I think issue 11 just came out with Joseph Gray, possibly the best mountain runner of all time, who also happens to be Black. Really good episode. Can recommend that. So yeah, that's doing pretty well. And we've got our own website at blacktrailrunners.com. We've got a regular twice monthly newsletter now that goes out from there, so people can subscribe to that, find out what we're doing. Yeah, loads of ways to get involved.
I've listened to a few interviews with Joe Gray before, and he's really good. He speaks a lot about the representation stuff. How like there's tons of Black guys in America running track and cross country at high school and at university, but then you look at the trail running media, and it's a really media friendly sport. Like, it's easy to make amazing films, to take amazing pictures of people running in the mountains, but it's just it's overwhelmingly white. So there's like a disconnect there. You've got all these people who are running and then they leave university and they just stop unless they're running on the road. I like this. This is good. Your plans for
I'd like to say that was posed, but that I actually did feel like that at that point. That was the end of the North Downs Way 100 last year, the hottest race ever. It was just gruesome.
We're 3/4 of the way through the 2020 Centurion Running Grand Slam of 100 milers.
Yeah, so Centurion did really well last year, getting a lot of their events off. But only 3 of the 100 milers, they were compressed into a 9-week period, which was horrible in a way. And then, you know, with a few days remaining, the last one, South Downs Way 100, was cancelled. But because they'd been rescheduled last year, the first one, which was the North Downs Way 100, hadn't happened until August. So the normal date for the South Downs Way 100 is in June. So our entries have been carried forward. So assuming that it goes ahead, assuming that I manage to complete it, it will be within the calendar year. And so, you know, it will count as a Grand Slam. James has said it's going to count as a Grand Slam, and the 17 of us who have done the first 3 definitely think it will count as a Grand Slam.
I like that. So questions from the chat for you. As a white male, how do I help increase diversity within trail running? Already listening, observing, learning, and discussing, but is there anything else I can do?
Yeah, good question. So you should be asking questions of the organizers of the races that you enter and of the clubs that you're a part of. What are they doing to improve their representation, to make the sport more accessible, to offer the chance for people to learn skills? All of those 3 things, even if it's just counting who's there. I mean, we've started doing that with races. Race clubs don't do that yet. And that's something we're kind of working with England Athletics with to try and do, but we're a long way from doing that, I think. But if members of those clubs say, why aren't we counting this? They probably know exactly how many women they've got and how many men and how many who are non-binary, but they don't know how many people they've got of different ethnicities. I'm sure they don't, because they don't ask. So measure it and things generally change.
And in a related vein, do you have stats for road and track running?
No.
And I guess no,
we don't know of anyone who knows the data for road running, track running. Yeah. I mean, obviously we can see at the sharp end, at the professional end, you could do that, but that's not representative of the sport that most of us are involved in. So no is the answer.
You would hope that would be, gathering that information would be as easy as it has proved for you with trail running.
Yeah, I mean,
and with bigger races, if you get London Marathon to gather that information, boom, 40,000 data points.
Yeah, I mean, what it takes is will. That's one of the things we've discovered. No one's going to do this for us. We've just got to get out and do it ourselves. So, if you want stuff to change, take actions to make it change. I'm sure there are people watching this who are officers of running clubs, who know those people very well. Put the question to them. Say, why don't we do this? You'll get some pushback. We get it ourselves. People don't want to talk about that. That's just going to put people off. But that's not our experience. What our experience is that 99% of people entering races are quite happy to say what their ethnicity is. Why wouldn't they be?
Yeah. There's a lot of form filling involved in entering.
Yeah,
races.
I mean, you say how old you are, you say what your gender is. Why not?
Yeah. It takes you less time to tick that box than it does to fill in your next of kin address.
Yeah, and this goes back to the other thing, which is if people do nothing, we just end up with the same racist system that we've got, where
Yeah.
people are underrepresented. The options that people have are do nothing or actively do something about it. And if all that is being prepared to tick an ethnicity box in a form, well, how hard can that be? Is that, you know, if you say that you're on our side, then you can make that commitment at the very least, surely.
Is the distinction that you've drawn elsewhere between tolerance and inclusivity?
Yeah, I mean, I hear inclusive used a lot and just used incorrectly. You know, what they mean is that, well, if you turn up to our party, we won't throw you out, but we didn't invite you. Yeah. That's kind of what they're saying.
You've said there's a video on your, I think it's on your YouTube channel, on the Black Trail Runners YouTube channel, that it would be great if we didn't have to exist, if it was just natural to see more Black people in the outdoors. Can you imagine a time, do you expect a time where you can disband, cease to exist? Or is that?
I can imagine it, yeah. I think it's a long way off, but I can imagine it. I don't see why not. You know, we have to approach these things optimistically. You know, end of last year, for one of the podcast episodes, and someone I saw asked, what's the podcast called again? It's The Checkpoint. So I interviewed Michael Holding, the West Indies fast bowling legend. And he is currently writing a book about race and history and how Black history has been erased from much of our history teaching. And we put that question to him, you know, do you see, you know, are you optimistic about the future, if you like? And he said, well, yeah, I have to be. And the reason that I'm optimistic is because the thing that will change this is education. And you remove prejudice, you remove these things through education. And that's something that you can work at, you know, very actively with every sort of successive generation. You know, people aren't born discriminating against other people, they learn it. And so they can unlearn it as well, or you can teach them differently in the first place.
That's excellent. I think that is a wonderful note to end on. There you go. That's a good image. That feels so I deliberately.
Yeah, there was no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, unfortunately, but yeah, it's a very nice.
Does this lead to the photo of you on the track?
Yeah.
No, it's actually, this has been true across the talks that we've done. It's been fantastic to have people who've got such a good, readily available selection of photos. If I was asked to
yeah, I'm just a bit of a poser, really. So
pictures of my feet from 6 years ago. Sonny, thank you very much. That's been incredible. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm sure other people feel the same.
Great, my pleasure. Happy to, well, as you gathered, happy to talk fairly endlessly.
I'm going to jump in there and echo Ally's thanks and say, yeah, that was amazing. I normally, whilst these talks are happening, I'm kind of doing a million things and writing emails and in relation to the talk, I mean, and kind of Anna and I are messaging each other, but actually I've been kind of neglecting all of that this time, just listening because I'm kind of like absorbing it all. Really fascinating. I'm not the only one. Normally, as these talks go on, you get to about kind of 40 minutes in and the numbers start to dwindle off as people get sucked into kids' bedtimes and so on. We've got pretty much the same number of people watching now as we had at the start. So I think you've definitely, just talking eloquently and knowledgeably about it is brilliant. It's given us food for quite, Anna and I have been bouncing ideas about what Chef can do. Chef's coming up, you know, normally it would be happening next weekend, but that's not happening. So we're going to be doing it in July. So yeah, well, I'm going to follow up with a conversation with you, see whether we can, you know, Chef happens in Sheffield, which is a pretty diverse city. So we want to basically talk to you, see if we can get a taster run going for some of the kind of, you know, non-white population in Sheffield who might want to kind of try out some trail running either in the city centre or out in the Peak District. So yeah, we'll follow up with
that. We'd love that. Yeah.
And there's lots of other stuff we could do. I've made lots of notes.
Excellent.
I'm also going to because we'll put this on the on YouTube. We'll be sharing it. There's a Facebook group called the Race Directors Hub. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah.
So I'll be posting on that and recommending that
Great.
all the race directors just have a listen or a watch. Anyway, enough wobbling on from me. I'm going to do a little thing here. I'm just going to basically allow people, if you like, to unmute yourselves. If you want to say thank you, or even if you've got a quick question, we've still got a few minutes. So yeah, I'll leave it up for a few minutes for people just say thank you, but I'll say thanks myself one more time, and we'll speak tomorrow, Sonny.
My pleasure. And thank you for inviting us on. And I'm just one of the founders of the group, so I drew the long straw and got to come and do this, so that's great. And thank you to Ally for asking great questions and preparing for this well. So it's been a real pleasure and great to get the message out to more people. That's part of what we're about. If it's about education, well, that involves talking to people about things and talking to people about things that they don't necessarily know about. So it's great to see comments in the chat saying that people have learned. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Cheers.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. It's Carly. Thank you. That was really good talk, really interesting. And I'm so glad I joined. Did you say that this would be available on YouTube? Because I'd really like to share it with some of my followers on Instagram and also friends and family and other fellow runners, because I just think there's just so much insight for people here. It would be
yes,
really good.
Well, yeah.
Obviously with a link to a donation as well.
We'll get it up on YouTube tomorrow.
Cool.
If you registered via Eventbrite, then we'll send an email out tomorrow with the link to YouTube. If not, then just log on to the SHAF website, Sheffield Adventure Film Festival, and on the bottom there's a little YouTube link and it'll take you there. All of our talks are on there. I'd say we did a similar talk to this. We had a series of series of talks on wild swimming, and we had a talk with Ed and Danielle from the Black Swimmers Association about a month ago, which was equally interesting and enlightening and educational. So I think it's really important for us to realize that this is not just a trail running issue, as Sonny's kind of intimated. It's across everything.
Yeah, lots of outdoor sports, definitely. And then my other question was one for you, Sonny, was I've followed you guys for quite a while now on social, and I regularly chat to. I'm trying to convince Sabrina, once we're all allowed to travel and move around, to come up to the Malverns and come running with me. Although I have told her that she's not allowed to run too fast. One of the things I wondered, obviously, like, do you guys plan in the future to have trail running groups, sort of like hubs around the country? Because I think that's because I know you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we will. We're not there yet. I mean, I think that the last 9 months have been so unusual that we haven't been able to do the kind of in-person and physical things that we'd like to do. So I think when things open up and get more back to some sort of sense of normality, certainly when events are all happening more frequently, then I think there'll be much more appetite for that. And we are definitely keen to do that. We want, particularly, as I said, we know that most Black people live in cities, so we've got concentrations or population density in London, Birmingham, in the East Midlands, in West Yorkshire, in Merseyside, in Bristol. So we would love to have stuff happening in those, accessible from those areas. That absolutely makes sense for us.
Yeah, that would be really awesome, and I would happily help do that if there's anything I can do, because I'm in Worcestershire, so I'm between Bristol and Birmingham. So if I can help support that, I'd love to.
Fantastic. Yeah. So join our Facebook group and keep in touch. we're all doing this voluntarily, so we're all holding down jobs. So we're sometimes not as speedy at getting back to people as we'd like to be, but we absolutely welcome and appreciate all offers of help. And when things start opening up and we can have more events, we'll be calling on those people to help us, definitely.
Well, thank you.
Right, I'm going to close the meeting in about a minute. So if you want to say thank you, shout thank you. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Fab. I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you very much indeed, Sonny. Really enjoyed that. And well, enjoy's the wrong word, really, isn't it? It goes beyond enjoyment. It kind of feels like it's essential viewing, really.
Well, we spent a lot of time in a meeting at university today talking about engagement. That's what we want, engagement. We don't care if you enjoy it, just engage in it.
Well, by virtue of the fact that there was the same number of people at the end as there were at the beginning, I think we scored a tick on that one.
If I could do that in my lectures, I'd be happy.
Yeah, they may have all fallen asleep.
True.
All right, thank you again.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.